So it's my great pleasure to present our next speaker, Renée Lertzman, who's a member of our community. She's practiced in both our insight meditation community and also Tibetan lineages. And she's a psychologist and a climate trauma psychologist, one way that I think of her. She's a pioneer and a leader in the intersection of psychology and climate and environment, and bringing consciousness to this situation. And she works with businesses and NGOs and corporations, and wanting to bring more engagement and wise action to awaken our capacity to change. And she's talking from Stockholm, Sweden, where she just arrived yesterday. So hope you're hanging in there, and that jet lag doesn't keep you from being your clear, brilliant self. And thanks so much for joining us. And I'm sure that it was worth the carbon footprint in what you're doing over there. So thanks so much, Renee, for being with us and helping us look at beyond hope and despair, or whatever it is that you're wanting to share from your teachings and presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I couldn't imagine a more interesting way to spend my second evening with jet lag than speaking with you all. One way of looking at it is it's less filtered. So the channels are probably more open than usual right now. So I'm just really honored to be part of this conversation. You know, I met James at one of the series that you ran in Berkeley a number of years ago. I approached you. I was like, this is what I'm doing. There's something here to explore. And so when you circled back after a number of years, it just felt like it was an immediate yes. Yes, of course, I would like to be part of this, and I'll just make it work however I can. So here we are. And so what I would like to do with our time is I would like to share a little bit of context with this group around where I'm coming from, a little bit about my story, how I'm approaching this work. I would like to share some examples with you of how I've translated basically the teachings. Virtually everything I do, which I think will become clear, is informed and influenced by Dharma, but it's not obvious. It's very guerrilla tactic. And usually people who know and are practicing Dharma can pick it up, but the whole idea is how to bring this into context that may not ordinarily be as open to that. And so I'm going to show you some examples, a short video, and then a resource I've developed with the help of a foundation over here in Denmark. And then I'd like to have some time. I'd like to do a little bit of experience, a little practice, and then have time for questions and reactions and responses to what I've shared. So this is very much in the spirit of offering, sharing some perspectives, and then just seeing what it sparks and stimulates for you as I go through this. So I'm going to start first by acknowledging the words, the Dharma holds the key. I put a little comment in the chat. I was, being kind of joking, but not really. Like you really do need to go and grab that title and buy the domain. I 100% agree. The Dharma holds the key, and I agree that slowing down and connecting is what it's really all about in service of going fast. So there's a meme circulating in the business world right now, which is like, for anyone who practices Dharma, is like, yeah, we've known that for a long time, but this meme of slowing down to go fast. So if I were to, position kind of my orientation to this work, it is fundamentally, if I were to distill it down to an essence, the essence is, and is Kristen Barker on the call? Kristen, are you here? You somewhere? Hello.
Hi. Hey.
Yeah. Hey. Hey. Okay. My total ally, friend, collaborator, partner, like so much of what I'm going to share is inspired and influenced by you as well. So it's really like our conversations have been so generative over the years. It's really and truly about how to stay present amidst what's happening. Like if there's an essence, that's it. No matter who I'd be working with or talking to in anywhere in the world, background, context, it's like, okay, here's what's happening. How do we stay present? How do we stay engaged without basically losing it? And that to me is what this practice is. That is what it's about. And so, I think that's the work. So I want to give you a little bit of background and context on how I came to this, which is, and some of you know this already, but basically for me, I locate the story when I was 18 and 19, and I was at UC Santa Cruz. I was a psychology major. I had already been in therapy because I grew up in the Bay Area. I had a therapist in high school. I was like, I'm going to become a therapist. My aunt is a teacher in the Diamond Approach. I had been exposed to Buddhist teaching in high school already. So I was just like, okay, this is obviously what's going to happen. And then what happened was 4 things happened. 1, I took an environmental studies class, almost by accident. I just sort of like, randomly enrolled in a course that completely destabilized me emotionally, existentially. In every way, I was thrown into a very, it just was completely crazy making, that we were learning about global ecological crises and basically, how humans have just damaged the planet and, deforestation and dislocation. And okay, so there's that. So that happened. Then I was taking at UC Santa Cruz in the late 1980s, a lot of classes about challenging the kind of normative narrative about what we, how you're taught especially as a white American, like it was like, oh, guess what? We have actually, let's look behind the curtain here and look at the trauma, the intergenerational trauma that we are all living on and standing on. So that was happening. So I was taking all these classes that were just like in a pretty matter-of-fact way with not a lot of attention to how do we process this, basically saying, oh, here's the history of, native indigenous communities in North America or in Australia. Like, here, let's look at this genocide. And, oh, let's look at this toxic contamination in these vulnerable communities and, parts of the US and other parts of the world. Oh, and by the way, gender isn't what we thought it was. And identity isn't at all what we thought it was. And so good luck with that. See you later. So there was that happening. And then I basically discovered the work of Joanna Macy. And so that was really a turning point. So when I came across Joanna Macy's work, it was the first time that I saw someone speaking explicitly about despair, about trauma in relation to, at the time, it was nuclear threat, and despair and empowerment in the nuclear age. And I decided that that's what I was going to do. I was going to focus my my work on that. And so around this time, I also found my way to karma choling, started doing some meditation practice. And so all these things came together in a way where I've spent the past 30 years really looking at what does it mean to, live with the knowledge of what we've done to the planet and to each other. How do we create spaces? How do we create the context and the conditions that truly enable and allow us to stay present, to engage, and to respond in constructive ways? And so I did a significant pivot where I chose not to pursue becoming a psychologist after all. I decided that I wanted to really work with organizations and to understand at the deepest level possible, why is it that humans are not responding, in a way that we might think that you would think would make sense? Why is it that there's a sort of perplexing lack of what we would call engagement or action or response that's commensurate with the level and the scale of threat that we are dealing with? That really has been the guiding question. And so there's a number of ways to go about that question, but I want to share with you some sort of ways forward that I've found over the years that have been particularly helpful for me in navigating that. And that is really understanding, again, what happens when we are confronted with information and inputs and news that is just, it just pops us out of our zone, pops us out of what Daniel Siegel calls our window of tolerance, right? This window where we can tolerate, only up to a certain amount of stress, of anxiety, of inputs. How do we stay in that zone and not get popped out into either overreactivity of the kind of what he talks about as hypoarousal and hyperarousal? How do we stay in that zone? And how we stay in that zone comes back over and over again to relationship. It comes back over and over again to connection. It comes back over and over again to basically how do we cultivate the ability to be connected with ourselves, to our own experience, our connection with each other, with other humans, and our connection with the world, with the earth, with the planet, with our environment, with the context in which we're in. And that over and over again, no matter whether you're looking at neuroscience, whether you're looking at, various fields in social psychology, whether you're looking at trauma work, whether you're looking at Buddhist practice, it really comes back again and again to the primacy and the role of the quality of relationship and the quality of presence that we have. And what I really appreciate about James, what you're talking about with really looking at the centrality of love, of really tapping into our love, our connection, is really truly what's now increasingly being identified as our true superpower, our true kind of fuel and resourcing that we can draw on amidst what's happening. So I hope this is interesting for folks to get a taste of how I've translated this work and this research over the years into some practices and some tools and materials that I've been able to use and create in partnership with a number of organizations. So one of the influences that's been really important for me in my development has been a field called motivational interviewing. And motivational interviewing, if any of you on this call or any of you are work in social work, or in, public health sectors, motivational interviewing is actually quite a well-known modality. It's a well-known practice of working with people that is truly based on a fundamental orientation of staying in a place of curiosity and inquiry, and cultivating a relationship that is based on a recognition of the integrity and the autonomy of those with whom we are working with. And what I found over the years is that this offers incredible insights for us right now at this particular time, when the stakes are so high and when we have such a need to shift behaviors, to shift the way that we live on the planet. And what I see happening around me a lot, especially in the more kind of advocacy, activist circles, and maybe you experience this in your own lives, which is this tension of really wanting to just shake people and tell them, we've got to change right now. What's wrong with you? The world is on fire. We've got to do something now. And the fact that actually can have a paradoxical impact. It can actually lead people to resist, to tune out, to reject us, to not want to hear, to not want to be receptive. And so I think that this tension, this capacity, this skill set to be able to work with people, to be able to have these conversations, to be able to engage with a variety of communities and populations and individuals, in a variety of settings, including those who are particularly vulnerable to these issues, to be able to cultivate this context of real compassion, true compassion, even when the stakes are high, even when there's urgency, even when we really need to be acting. And so I found that the influence of motivational interviewing, combined with the years of kind of exposure and some training I've had with Buddhist mindfulness practice, is really, it really is truly offering us a tremendous amount of insight and wisdom that we can be tapping into increasingly right now. And so what I'd like to do is to share with you an example of how this has been applied in a very particular context, which was and I'm going to ask if you can queue up and get ready to show the video in a minute. I just want to set this up. So what I'd like to share with you is a short video that was created for young people, for people in high school. This was several years ago. I was engaged by the Alliance for Climate Education to do work with high school students around the US. So I traveled in multiple cities, multiple contexts, and I worked with various groups of high school students who were wanting to engage with climate change, wanting to be effective as emerging climate activists, advocates, and leaders, and were struggling with being heard, struggling with getting people to talk to them. And this organization in particular had a program that they called Have the Talk, or something. It was something like that. And it was basically trying to support young people, or I should say enable young people to have some tools and some practices to have conversations with adults in their lives. And so, whether that's parents or guardians or teachers or people in their lives, older people in their lives. And so they put this video together based on that work. And it's based on the trainings that I had developed called these climate psych labs for young people. And so I would love to share that with you now, so you can get a taste of what this looks like in quite an applied way.
Talking about climate change can be tough. I mean, it's not like something you can just casually bring up in conversation. But it's such a big, important topic. We can't just ignore it. And while you can't fix climate change all by yourself, you do have the power to affect the people in your life. So let's talk more about climate change. Here's how. First, think about all the things you want to say about climate change, and don't say them. Really. You see, if you just start going off on how bad climate change is, people are probably going to shut down. They may feel attacked and put up their guard. It doesn't matter how eloquent your words are. If the other person's not listening, there's no point. So here's the secret to talking about climate change. Listen. Listen to the other person. I know it sounds weird, but it's the most important part. You may think the goal is to convince the other person of your perspective, but that's going about it all wrong. The goal is just to have an actual conversation, and that only happens when people listen. So, how do you start? First of all, don't ambush people. Get permission first. If they're busy, no need to force it. Just try again another time. Distractions make talking hard, so it's okay to ask to shut devices off. Once you have their attention, start with a question about climate change. Remember to make it about them, not you. Ask about their thoughts and their perspective. When they start speaking, you have one job: just listen. Resist any urge to respond right away. And whatever you do, don't interrupt. This might be the hardest part, especially if you have strong feelings or if the other person is saying something that you disagree with. But trust me on this. Just listen and be open to what they're saying. Now, if the other person doesn't say much, that doesn't mean you can go, okay, they're done, my turn. It's not your turn until you learn something about the other person. So encourage them to say more by asking follow-up questions. Ask about personal experiences. No need to go into science or politics. Reflect back what you hear them say. Repeating and referring to their words lets them know that you are listening, that you care about their point of view. This makes them feel valued and safe. When you earn their trust, they will be more willing to open up and listen to you. So, after they've shared their perspective, then ask if you can tell them about yours. Okay, now it's your turn. What will you say? Remember, the point is not to convince the other person of anything. If you try to do that, they may become defensive and stop listening. Just share what you personally think about climate change. You may not be a climate expert, but you are the expert on yourself. So, tell your story. When did you start caring about climate change? What worries you the most? After you're done talking, ask what they think. Bring it back to them. And, you guessed it, listen. That's what a conversation is, a two-way exchange of ideas. Go back and forth for as long as it feels right. Learn from one another. At the end, thank them for talking and say what you learned from them. This is important. Ending on a positive note makes it more likely that this conversation will happen again. You see, one little chat may not change anyone's life, but it opens the door to more climate conversations in the future. And that's how you build trust. Get others caring about climate change and make a long-term impact. You may be surprised how much you learn in the process too. So, what are you waiting for? Talk to someone about climate change. It may be one of the most important things you do.
Okay. So that was actually quite an effective campaign, and it went out to many thousands of young people on their mobile phones, and they tried it out, and it was sort of an experiment. And I'm just curious, it goes back to this theme around the Dharma is the key and staying present and engaging. And I'm just curious because I believe that actually our ability to have effective interactions with people is one of these things that it doesn't sound that, sexy or compelling, but I actually think it is absolutely the biggest unlock that we possibly could have, right? Which is that our ability to actually connect, communicate, and engage with people in productive ways that moves us forward, whether, you're speaking with leadership or whether you're speaking with young people or people in your life or family or workplace and organizations, as we really work through the hard stuff of what it means to really come to terms with these issues. So I'm just curious if there's any reactions or responses to what I've shared.
I just wanted to say, we watched that video in one of my master classes last year, community and conservation. and we were all kind of self-righteous initially with, we need to tell people what's going on, the world is on fire, and the teacher's like, yes, about that. This video is part of your next assignment, so watch that first and then talk to me. And so it's very pleasing to see it here today again, to know that it's circulating.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. It's really hard to do. Really, really hard, right? It's like an ongoing practice. I just, in full transparency, I'm getting feedback from someone in this group right now telling me that I'm talking too much about myself. It's really hard. You know, it's hard when we care deeply about issues, how to allow and create space for others. And I think it's important to have the mindset of this is an ongoing practice. So thanks for sharing that. Saw a couple of other hands. Brett.
Fred.
It looks like I've been unmuted, so I guess it's me. First, Dr. Lertzman, I don't think you're talking too much about yourself because your personal story is important and powerful. My unvarnished reaction is discouragement, because I agree absolutely with everything you said, but I'm so immersed in the enormity of what we face that I'm thinking, yeah, that's like if somebody's house is on fire, you knock gently on the door and say, what are your feelings about fire? Tell me about fire. In other words, I feel so profoundly the urgency of the crisis that when you tell me this is going to take time, you have to build a relationship, you have to listen, I completely agree with that. And I'm going, we really are screwed because we don't have time to have those conversations with all the people that we have to have. So I agree, and I'm left actually in despair. But fortunately, I'm taking James's course on joy, so it's all good.
Okay, thank you. So I really want to acknowledge you for sharing what you did, and to say that that is what I hear all the time, like all the time, every day, is that we don't have time for this. Come on, what are you talking about? We don't, one-to-one conversations. It's like, really, the house is on fire, we got to get going. And my response to that is a yes and. The yes and is this. Okay, so one thing is that it is possible to start with having different kinds of interactions, and that can include in organizational settings, with leadership, with communities, with your neighborhood, and so forth, to show up in a different way. And what I've seen over and over again is that that actually really can accelerate and lead to the ability for people to get into more constructive activation mode than anything else I've seen. So it doesn't take much time necessarily to see significant impact of having different kinds of interactions that include a bit more emotional intelligence, a bit more listening. It doesn't mean that we need to spend all our time talking. That obviously the end goal here is we need to be changing, we need to be doing things differently. But what I've seen, I've had the privilege of working inside organizations now for a number of years, including more recently big organizations like Google, like VMware, like Dow Chemical, like, it's kind of, I don't know how people get anything done, because humans are so complicated, and there's a lot of dynamics. And so I'm convinced more and more every day that actually being able to invest in some capability, and it could be very, very simple, about just practicing being present, practicing showing up, practicing listening, practicing evoking out of other people their own relationship to the issues, can cut through a lot of what's called swirl and unproductive behavior. So that's I'm not going to try to talk you out. I don't want to, your feelings are perfectly, make total sense. And I want to offer just a slightly different perspective on this kind of realm of looking at conversations.
Thank you. Anne, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Renee. Beautiful. And I actually have a different feeling than Fred. I feel inspired. And my question is, yeah, that's not in my backyard. My question is, this is such a great video to bring to these high school kids. You know, if I feel despair, which I do, the kids, oh my goodness, what we've done to leave their legacy. And so what is the plan to bring this forward, to continue this? You said it was something, it sounded like it was limited or limit. And so what's happening now?
Yeah, well, what's happening now is, so that work kind of came to a close. I believe that, you know, Alliance for Climate Education and other organizations are continuing to move on, you know, having better conversations. But what's happening now is an incredibly dynamic space where there's a lot going on when it comes to learning new tools and skills for having more effective climate interactions and conversations. There's climate cafes, there's climate coaching, there's a whole movement of climate coaches out there. But what I did want to share, I don't have time to get into this now, but what I wanted to share was a site with a resource that I developed with the help of the KR Foundation that's called Project Inside Out, that I'm going to post into the chat, which is, I would love for you to check it out. It's basically providing some tools and resources for, it was intended for organizations working on these issues. And it's almost like the next iteration of this kind of work. So I have guiding principles on the site that talk about attuning, how to communicate with more emotional intelligence. There's guides, there's worksheets, there's some videos, there's some interactive tools. And I'm just now entering a new phase of that work. And I'm actually in Europe to explore partnerships with a number of different organizations. So that's what's happening right now. But I want to just acknowledge it's like the field is just really dynamic and really vibrant right now.
Mm-hmm. And I want to also add that we've put together a resource guide for everyone who's registered with with websites and books and articles and clips. So you'll be seeing that, and Renee's work will be on that website. So Yelena, hi.
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee, for all the work. And fundamental in your talk is listening. That's a fundamental tool. And in my experience working with the young people and people who they interact with, is that listening is a skill greatly lacking. So I know you shared a toolkit. So I'm just curious, is that fundamental skill being taught in a particular way? Because it's a teaching of that skill, it's a practicing of that skill where we can actually start to engage in this conversation.
Right. Yeah, thank you. What I find encouraging and inspiring is the amount of attention and interest that's happening when it comes to listening. Like I've been traveling, you look in even airport bookstores and you kind of get a pulse. There's so much right now about empathy and listening, and it's clearly in the zeitgeist right now. And so I actually feel quite confident that there's going to be more and more attention to learning and resourcing and providing this kind of support for people, because I think it's what's really up for us as a society and a global community right now, and it's being recognized. So I witness, from my vantage point, this sort of like waking up to that, which is encouraging. And I feel that at the moment there's not enough attention to that in the climate space. I feel often, even though it's developing and very dynamic, I feel like there's still a lot of attention on fixing and solving and being in that problem solution mindset. And I often try to come in with a bit of an intervention with like, wait a minute, it's not about solving the problem. You know, it's actually about fundamentally evolving who we are as human beings. And I find that frame of, hey, it's time to level up. And you'll see on Project Inside Out, if you go to the site, there's like a little bit of a narrative you scroll through, which was an experiment. And actually it says our love is a superpower. It's like all that stuff. But what it really, I'm trying to do here is to say, we have an opportunity to level up as humans, to evolve and learn how to show up and listen and be more present, as opposed to, oh, we're doing it all wrong. And, you should stop being such a whatever, an activist that's just shouting at people. I'm trying to apply a lot of emotion, compassion, frankly. I'm trying to take a compassionate approach and to say, you know what, I need to learn how to listen more, right? Like I talk too much. A lot of us do. So I feel encouraged. I think it is starting to happen more and more. And let's all bring it up more in the context that we're in. I think it's important to say this is hard. It's easy to give lip service to empathy and listening. It's like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? As a human, it's very hard when we care so deeply. We're really freaked out. We're really scared. The stakes are really high. All you want to do is to just like get in people's face. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy.
Thank you, Renee. And thank you, James. And keep on talking and keep on listening. I think what's coming up for me is like Charlie Brown, like get a table out in our community and sit across and simplify this in some way and listen,
Yeah.
It's almost like being Lucy, having my hand in my arm here and listening across from a table.
Yes.
So we can just have more tables.
Yes. So I 100% agree. And that is happening. There's a colleague of mine, I want to try to look her up. She literally, that's what she's been doing. There's been some articles written about her. She's got a book coming out where she literally has set up a table like Lucy and has had listening like a booth at like gatherings. And there's someone else I know who does sidewalk listening. And so there are these emergent projects that are percolating, climate cafes, but you're completely right. It doesn't have to be complicated. And for those of you in this call who do community organizing, who do grassroots work, who do neuroscientific work, who do psychotherapy, research, that the most powerful thing we can do is to listen and enable people to speak their experience. And what happens is with that presence, that people actually find their way through to clarity around, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I need to do. But it's holding that space, which people just often rush into it and just say, no, solution. And I know that there's some drawdown component. I don't know if you've already covered that in the session already. I'm very familiar with drawdown, with regeneration, really beautiful work. It's very solutions oriented. It's really like, okay, we've got this. We got this. We can do this. And I would love to see that kind of work be joined up with listening, with spaces, with processing.
Great, thank you. And we will get to regeneration in the afternoon. Actually, we only have time for one last question, and it just by welcome. And I don't know who welcome is, but you're welcome to talk.
Thank you, James. Dave Apple.
Hi, Dave.
I'm curious. You're just mentioning the supplements to listening, which I think has to be optimism, and I'd like to hear your views on that. How would you persuade a young person to think about, to act, not just persuading others, but making a difference in the world in terms of solutions to this very serious problem. So what role is optimism? How do
Well, that's a really big question for having 1 minute. Okay, so first off, I would say with compassion that it's not about persuading anyone of anything. I really try to redirect from the framing of persuasion to guiding and engaging, because persuasion sounds like I've got an agenda and I'm trying to change you or get you to change. And that is often not a very effective way to come at these dynamics. So how do we engage and guide people in the direction is one thing. Two, I don't think I'm not actually a fan of the optimism frame. You know, I'm interested in transcending, you know, thinking in terms of hope, optimism, despair. You know, I think we're at a place now, and many other people other than myself have been very eloquent about the nuance of, you know, whether you call it pragmatic, grounded realism, whatever, like that we get. I think there's something here. I'm going to circle back to James with the Dharma as the key. Okay, so there's something really powerful and mysterious about what we get when we're fully present and when we're fully engaged with life on its own terms, that generates optimism, that generates, because it's almost like a hybrid, you know, that just kind of gets charged while it's going. That is where we want to direct people to put their attention towards, not attachment to what differences it's going to make, because that is actually a fast track to nowhere. What we want to do is to anchor in, I'm here right now, and I'm going to just take all of my resources and the energy and the life that I've got, and I'm going to direct it in service of what I love and I care about. And that is what gives me optimism, is that knowing that I'm part of millions and millions of humans right now doing exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And yeah, and that is the key, that you're not alone. And the more you feel connected and you're doing it with others, the more energizing it is and the more magnetizing it is. So, well, Renee, we have to stop here. Thank you so much for going through your jet lag and being with us and sharing your work and keeping doing what you're doing. So glad that you're part of our community, and we're all cheering for you and
Thank you.
Inspired.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.